but it depends how you break it down, and Shia groups that said U.S. interference was undermining their democratic process, and that its reluctance to recognize Hezbollah made things more complicated for them in their democratic process as well. So both those countries immensely complicated, and they really invert a lot of your easy stereotypes of Islam anti-America, Christian pro-America, secular pro-America, Islam anti-America, because Turkey flips that around and Lebanon flips that around. So they were both perfect countries, I think, to begin this project with, and I was there at very, very critical times. In Lebanon, amphibious tanks were on the streets and snipers were in the roofs. I mean, that's sort of always the case, but you could feel a bit of tension. One of Vivian's questions was, are they worried that there might be another civil war? And what I heard was, there's been so much bloodshed. The Lebanon war of, Israel's war against Lebanon from 2006 devastated a lot of the country, and they're still rebuilding from that. So in terms of the fear of another civil war, it's there, but it was not as much as at other points in their recent history, at least from what I could tell. Then I was in Israel during the Annapolis conference, and it was, again, a very intense time, but here was really the sense that, America's overt intervention was, at that time, people were saying, it's really Bush's ploy to isolate Iran by pulling together Arab neighbors, and that it's not really about Israel-Palestine. I heard this from Palestinians and Israelis. Palestinians were saying, look, we're too fractured, Hamas and Fatah are fighting, what type of peace agreement can we do? And Israelis said something more or less along the same lines, what type of agreement will ensure peace? Everyone will say they're hopeful, but everyone will also say they don't think it'll take place soon. Peace won't take place soon. I didn't meet someone who really saw Annapolis bringing peace in the next year. Nobody, before or after, to be frank. In terms of the question is, how have I been treated as an American, or have I been treated as a man of South Asian descent? In Turkey, Lebanon, and Israel, people would always say, oh, you look Turkish, oh, you look Lebanese, oh, you look Palestinian, oh, you look Israeli, Bakshi's an Israeli name, Amar is an Islamic name. And I kind of, smiled and nodded and said, yes, you're beautiful people, I'd love to be associated with you. And that immediately kind of took the edge off whatever American strand I might have carried with me. It's hard to explain, and I haven't had the experience of being white also, so I don't know how I've been treated differently. But I do think, and I would imagine, that people assumed more of an empathy from me than they might have from someone else who is white, regardless of the truth of the matter, regardless of whether or not I am or am not more empathetic. Now, that only worked for the first minute. Once I start talking, and what I say and how I ask a question, of course, colors their view of me just like they would anyone else, regardless of race or descent. But I always introduce myself as an American of Indian ancestry, or an Indian American. I talked about Turkey. It was intense. You could feel the tension on the streets. In terms of what was the most interesting or upsetting story I've covered, I think my time in Hebron, which is a settlement in the West Bank, was very, very uncomfortable because of how committed the Israeli settler group was to holding that land for religious reasons and political reasons, and how much, you hear about racism and you hear about people pushing, not really accepting other people. Never had I seen it displayed so brutally. There were signs saying, Arabs stole our land, we must eject them, Arabs are terrorists, so on and so forth. And I saw videos of young settlers throwing stones at Arabs, and then I saw, of course, Palestinians who are not blameless at all, bullet holes from their guns shooting into the settlements. I could see where the bullet struck just a few feet away from this settler's children when they were like 3 and 5 years old. How do you explain that to a kid, to either kid? One, why are these kids throwing stones at me? Two, why are those guys shooting bullets at us? And what's particularly painful about looking at it is just how, when you imagine yourself there, and you imagine being so near death or being bruised, or you imagine even knowing someone who was killed or was bruised, how do you see that and not feel hate? And how do you see that and not feel hate when your parents preach hatred? That was a very, tragic and sad thing to see, because when you talk about this Israeli-Palestinian issue not being resolved, it's often framed it like, well, if only they understood one another, if only they saw one another. Yes, that's true, but there's also this level of really uh, deep and profound actions that accompany that racism. In Sderot, in the south of Israel, uh, Qassam rockets strike daily. They kill maybe 2 people a year. But you talk to children and they're terrified. You can see the streets are designed for people to run out from different locations behind blast walls. And cars, people are trying to pass a law so you don't have to wear a seatbelt in your car so you can run as fast as possible when the rocket falls. Um, as a first timer in this whole region and a first timer in Israel, it just interviewing someone on one side and then interviewing someone on another side was a bit disheartening, to be honest. You you see someone from a Hezbollah stronghold who says Israel demolished my home, and then you see someone from an Israeli community that says, "Look, I've done nothing, and there are bombs falling on me." And how do you explain to either one? And how do you explain to either one's children why this is happening, and what has to be done to fix it in pragmatic terms? Um, it's possible, certainly, but it's difficult, and I think I never appreciated that until I got here. And I never really appreciated either America's centrality. You assume it, but you don't see why others would assume it too. And that's something that's very interesting to me. I'm about to go to Mindanao, which is an Islamic separatist, or wants to be separatist, south of the Philippines. And this is sort of DL, but they're seeking American intervention, not military, but American diplomatic intervention to help the peace talks between them and the Filipino government. And you wonder, why America? Why not another regional neighbor, a powerful regional neighbor? Why do you keep going to the U.S.? And there's a sense that it is the broker that can achieve this peace. It has the force, it has the clout. It's a tremendous responsibility, not only for the political leaders, but for citizens to realize and to vote on this for the sake of and to pay attention to. I'm sure I've talked for far more than 10 minutes. I'm sorry, guys. Let me take a look. It doesn't tell me how. Oh my god, I've talked for 15 minutes. Alright, I'm really sorry that I've talked for so long. I hope Vivian can cut this down and shave it up. And yeah, and if you have any other questions, please send them along. But after this boring rambling, I'm sure you will think twice before mailing anything else. Alright, well, all the best, and please email me again anytime with questions, okay?